What if the very spark that ignited modern liberty, the French Revolution, had been snuffed out before it could truly catch fire? What if the cries of liberté, égalité, fraternité had been silenced, leaving the ancien regime intact, unchallenged, and perhaps even strengthened? This is a story of a world where the tumbrils never rolled, where the Bastille remained a formidable prison, and where the echoes of revolution were replaced by the solemn tread of royal guards. The summer of 1789 in Paris is not, as history records, a hotbed of revolutionary fervor. Instead, it is a city simmering with discontent, yet tightly controlled. Rumors of royal troops converging on the capital are rife, but unlike our timeline, these are not mere threats. King Louis XVI, advised by a more resolute Queen Marie Antoinette and an unyielding circle of hardline nobles, has acted preemptively. The Swiss Guard, reinforced by regiments loyal to the crown from the provinces, patrols the streets with an unprecedented visible presence. The grumbling of the populace, fueled by bread shortages, is met not with hesitant reforms, but with the cold, unyielding gleam of bayonets. The famous Necker, our timeline's brief hope for fiscal reform, has been dismissed, not just from office, but from Paris entirely, exiled for even suggesting concessions. July 14, 1789. The air crackles with tension, but the storming of the Bastille never happens. Instead, a large, restless crowd gathers, spurred on by radical elements and desperate for arms and gunpowder. However, Governor de Launay, under strict royal orders, has fortified the prison beyond its usual state. Cannons are openly displayed, loaded and manned. As the initial tentative attempts to parley turn into a chaotic surge, a single decisive volley of musket fire from the Bastille walls tears through the leading ranks of the crowd. The message is clear, brutal, and immediate. The sheer brutality of the crown's response shatters the nascent revolutionary spirit, sending the remaining crowd scattering in terror. The failed assault on the Bastille serves as a chilling testament to Louis XVI's newfound resolve. The king, no longer indecisive, embraces the role of absolute monarch. He delivers a scathing address to the Parliament of Paris, condemning any seditious thought and reaffirming his divine right to rule. This strong stance, orchestrated by his closest advisors, effectively stifles any further open defiance within the capital. The fear of reprisal, rather than the hope of reform, becomes the dominant emotion. The concept of a constitutional monarchy, which had been tentatively debated, is now utterly dismissed as a dangerous fantasy. The ancien regime, bruised but unbroken, flexes its muscle. While Paris is quelled, news of the brutal crackdown travels fast to the provinces, sparking localized uprisings. However, unlike our history, there is no unified command or widespread popular support for a grand revolution. Instead, many liberal nobles and intellectuals, realizing the dream of reform is dead, begin to flee France. Not to join a counter-revolutionary army, but simply to escape the tightening grip of royal control. They seek refuge in the smaller German states, Switzerland, and even the fledgling United States, carrying with them the ideals that could not bloom on French soil, becoming a diaspora of Enlightenment thinkers. In the wake of the failed uprisings, the Crown institutes a series of sweeping edicts designed to prevent any future challenges to its authority. Freedom of the press is abolished, public gatherings are severely restricted, and a new, more pervasive network of royal informants is established. The traditional Parlement, once independent bodies with some judicial power, are stripped of their remaining influence and largely converted into administrative tools of the Crown. The Church, already a loyal ally, sees its traditional privileges reinforced, becoming an even more integral part of the state's apparatus for social control and ideological conformity. The Estates General, which had been convoked as a desperate measure to address the financial crisis, never gains any real power. After the suppression of the revolts, Louis XVI, emboldened, dissolves the assembly entirely. The Third Estate, having briefly tasted the possibility of representation, is left disillusioned and disenfranchised. The financial woes of the kingdom persist, but without any genuine attempt at reform, the Crown resorts to increasingly desperate measures, forced loans, arbitrary taxation, and the sale of public offices, further burdening the already struggling populace and exacerbating underlying resentments. The French army, instead of being fractured by revolutionary ideals, emerges from the crisis as a powerful, unified instrument of the monarchy. The successful suppression of the initial revolts instills a sense of discipline and loyalty within the ranks. Officers who showed any Republican sympathies are purged, replaced by staunch royalists. This professional, battle-hardened force becomes a crucial tool for maintaining internal order and projecting French power externally. Its loyalty to the king is absolute, a stark contrast to the revolutionary armies that would have reshaped Europe in our timeline. With no successful revolution to join, the stream of émigrés, while initially significant, soon dwindles. Many who had fled find themselves without a cause or a welcoming haven. Some eventually return to France, chastened and wary of royal displeasure, quietly reintegrating into society under the watchful eye of the crown. The grand aristocratic émigré armies, so pivotal in our history's counter-revolution, never materialize. This eliminates a key external threat, allowing the Bourbon monarchy to consolidate its power without the constant fear of foreign intervention spurred by disgruntled nobles. Without the radical reforms of the revolution, France's pre-existing economic problems persist and deepen. The archaic tax system, riddled with exemptions for the nobility and clergy, remains intact. The national debt, once a driver of revolutionary sentiment, continues to balloon under the weight of royal extravagance and inefficient administration. Attempts at modernization are piecemeal and largely ineffective, stifled by entrenched interests and a fear of any change that might upset the delicate balance of power. France, the most populous nation in Europe, remains a financial giant with feet of clay. Napoleon Bonaparte, the ambitious Corsican artillery officer, finds his meteoric rise impossible in this stagnant royal France. Without the revolutionary wars and the meritocratic opportunities they presented, he remains a relatively obscure figure, perhaps a competent but ultimately minor officer in the royal army. Or perhaps he leaves France altogether for a mercenary career. His genius for warfare and administration remains untapped by the rigid Ancien regime. The map of Europe, therefore, is never redrawn by his hand, and the very concept of widespread nationalism fails to ignite across the continent. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen is never conceived, never debated, never adopted. The fundamental concepts of universal human rights, popular sovereignty, and equality before the law, which profoundly influenced subsequent liberal movements, remain dormant or confined to the abstract discussions of philosophers. French society remains rigidly hierarchical, based on privilege and birthright, rather than merit or individual liberty. This absence profoundly shapes the political discourse and social structures of not just France, but potentially all of Europe. Without the ideological challenge of revolutionary France, the absolute monarchies of Europe feel little pressure to reform. The Habsburgs, Hohenzollerns, and Romanovs maintain their autocratic grip with greater confidence. The spirit of the Enlightenment, while present, is far less potent without the French example. The concept of popular sovereignty is viewed as a dangerous, contained anomaly. This ensures a longer, more stable reign for the old order across the continent, postponing or perhaps entirely preventing the widespread liberal revolutions of the 19th century. The dismantling of feudal privileges, a cornerstone of the French Revolution, never occurs. The nobility retains its ancient rights, including seigneurial dues, exclusive hunting rights, and exemptions from many taxes. The peasantry remains largely bound to the land, subject to the whims of their landlords, and perpetually impoverished. This continued socio-economic inequality acts as a festering wound within French society, a source of constant, low-level resentment and potential future instability, even if immediate revolution is suppressed. The Gallican Church, instead of being stripped of its wealth and influence, remains a powerful and integral pillar of the French state. Its vast land holdings are untouched, its tithes continue to be collected, and its role in education and social welfare remains paramount. The close alliance between altar and throne solidifies, presenting a united front against any liberal or secularizing tendencies. Religious conservatism remains dominant, influencing all aspects of French life and discouraging intellectual dissent. The monarchy, having survived the immediate threat, consolidates its dynastic power. Louis XVI, having proven his resolve, eventually passes the throne to his son, Louis XVII, who, unlike in our timeline, lives to inherit the crown. This unbroken line of succession, without the interregnum of revolution or empire, fosters a sense of legitimacy and continuity for the Bourbon dynasty. Future monarchs, having learned from the near catastrophe of 1789, might rule with a firmer hand, perhaps even embracing minor, controlled reforms to prevent another such crisis. With no revolutionary France to unite against, the traditional European powers, while still engaged in complex diplomacy, are not forced into the same grand coalitions. The long era of relatively stable, if sometimes antagonistic, balance of power among the great monarchies persists. Prussia, Austria, Russia, and Great Britain continue their geopolitical chess games, but without the existential threat of French republicanism, the focus remains on territorial gains and strategic advantages rather than ideological crusade. The French Revolution's abolition of slavery and its subsequent reversal under Napoleon highlight the volatile nature of revolutionary ideals. In this alternate timeline, without the radical shifts in metropolitan France, the institution of slavery in French colonies, particularly Saint-Domingue, Haiti, remains unchallenged. The slave revolts, notably the Haitian Revolution, are likely to be brutally suppressed by a stable, well-resourced French monarchy, determined to maintain its profitable colonial empire. The global tide of abolitionism is significantly delayed or weakened. Without the revolutionary disruption and subsequent Napoleonic-era reforms, France's industrialization proceeds at a much slower pace. The rigid social hierarchy, limited internal markets due to widespread poverty, and the Crown's preference for mercantilist policies over free market capitalism stifle innovation and investment. Great Britain continues its lead in the Industrial Revolution, while France, though still a major power, falls further behind in economic and technological development, relying more on its agricultural wealth and established crafts. With the revolution's failure, the glittering court culture of Versailles experiences a resurgence, though perhaps with a touch more sobriety than before 1789. The salons of Paris, once centers of Enlightenment discussion that verged on dissent, become once more primarily venues for literary and artistic discourse, firmly within the boundaries of acceptable royalist thought. Patronage from the crown and nobility remains the primary avenue for artistic and intellectual success, fostering a culture that emphasizes beauty and tradition over radical innovation or social commentary. The failed French Revolution acts as a profound cautionary tale for European elites. The dominant political philosophy of the 19th century shifts even more heavily towards conservatism, with an emphasis on tradition, order, and the preservation of established institutions. Ideas of liberalism, democracy, and nationalism are actively suppressed and viewed with suspicion, particularly in states like France. The intellectual currents that fueled our timeline's social and political upheavals find less fertile ground, leading to a prolonged era of monarchical dominance across the continent. The complete failure of the French Revolution in 1789 paints a stark and sobering alternate reality. It is a world where the Enlightenment's ideals, so potent in our own history, remain largely theoretical, confined to intellectual salons and whispered conversations rather than manifesting as tangible political change. The very fabric of European society, which in our timeline was irrevocably torn and rewoven by the revolutionary and Napoleonic eras, remains largely intact, preserving a rigid hierarchy rooted in birthright and privilege. The long-term legacy of this failure is a continent locked in a prolonged ancien regime. While pockets of discontent might persist, the grand transformative movements of the 19th century, the liberal revolutions, the rise of nationalism, the push for universal suffrage, and the widespread abolition of slavery are either significantly delayed, brutally crushed, or fundamentally altered. Without the French example, and the subsequent ideological clash that defined much of the 19th century, the pace of social and political evolution across Europe is glacial. Philosophically, this timeline questions the inevitability of progress and the inherent human drive for liberty. Does the absence of a successful revolution imply that radical change is merely an anomaly, or that it requires a specific confluence of factors that were, in our timeline, uniquely present in 1789? Morally, it forces us to confront the cost of stability at the expense of justice and equality. Is a peaceful, albeit stagnant, society preferable to the violent birth of a more equitable one? The world of the failed French Revolution is a reminder that history is not predetermined, and that the choices made, or not made, by individuals and societies can ripple through centuries, shaping the very nature of human existence. It is a world where the dream of liberty remains just that, a dream eternally deferred.
Thank you for taking the time to sit down with me and make this assumption. If you have any other opinions on the above issue, please leave your comments below. I will listen and respond to you as soon as I see them. Oh, and if you want us to discuss something else, you can also leave them below. Once again, thank you for listening. Have a nice day.